Welcome to another episode of our podcast where we delve into the stories that have the power to move and transform us before we knew them. Today, I'm honored to have Sam Eddinger join us, who has an extraordinary tale of loss, wisdom, and the relentless pursuit of growth in the face of adversity. Sam's world was turned upside down when he lost his mother in a tragic hit and run accident. Out of this heartbreak, he had a philosophy that emerged on life that challenges conventional notions of fairness, the journey from intelligence to wisdom, and the power of faith. Sam's story is not just one of confronting grief, but also about the transformation that leads to profound insights and living. So join us as we navigate through the turning points that define us and the moments that compel us to change in a conversation that promises to be as enlightening as it is emotional. Find the perfect real estate or property management virtual assistants. Thousands of virtual assistants are at your fingertips. Browse our qualified and available virtual assistants to find your perfect match. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. I am really excited to dive into the conversation that we are going to have. And with that, I'm not going to make the introduction last any longer. I would love to hear your story. And if that means starting with your back history or wherever, you just lead the way on this one, and then we'll just start having conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Trey. I appreciate that. Yeah, I do want to speak a little bit to my backstory, because I think that really speaks a lot to my current story. So my brothers and I have four brothers and no sisters. We've always been a very tight-knit family. And I remember growing up and, helping my father with real estate and helping my mother. Doing all the normal things that boys do, wrestling and roughhousing and stuff. But family always was the center of our world, that and our faith. And so each and every one of my brothers, we all moved away from home to go to school and things like that. But because family was so foundational to everything that we did, we all moved back. So about 8 years ago in March, my mom was killed in a hit and run car accident. And, it was hard, because that foundation of family is what we all grew up around. We all moved away, but we all came back because we wanted to be near family. And, life is interesting, and we still are very close, my brothers and I and my dad. And I guess I thought I was going to give you more backstory, but that's okay.
That's okay.
It's the thing about life in general is you can't choose how you do your life, but you can choose while you're on this earth to be around the people that you want to be around. And that was the beautiful thing about my parents. So giving you a little bit more of the backstory, now that you know kind of what happened to me, that specific day, I had very conflicting emotions, because I got a call from my brother, and he had said to me that my mom got hit. And I was at work, and it was weird, because at this point, I didn't know my mom was dead. But, I'm of the mindset that, like, if I can't do anything about it, then I should stay and work. I should just do my thing. And so I did that. I almost felt guilty, because I was like, I had such weird emotions, because, my mom got hit in a car, but I was telling my boss, my mom got hit in a car, hit in a car accident. And they're like, well, was she in a car? And I was like, no. And they're like, you need to go home. And, it was weird, because, like, I couldn't control anything. And so I had all these mixed emotions. And I remember driving home. Then I got another call from my brother, who said, don't go to the hospital. She didn't make it. And, it was sad, but we all came together as a family. And, in those moments, it made national news. We got outpouring of support from people all over the country. And it was weird, because, even in those moments, news articles are sensationalized, and so we had people that tried to interview us and get these sound bites. And you know, life is weird in that way that, you know, you can have a platform and a voice when tragedy hits, and it's exactly when you don't want to have a voice.
Right.
I remember things like they were trying to, like, that same day, we were out because, you know, when my mom got hit and thrown, you know, after the police had kind of combed for evidence and things, like there was still like blood and things in our driveway. And they're trying to take like videos. And so I specifically remember like turning around because I didn't want to actually have, because they put a camera right in your face.
Sure.
So I
Yeah.
turned around and I was like, I'll talk to you, but I'm not going to talk to you with a camera in my face, right?
Yeah.
So like you can, so it's always interesting, you know, life and when tragedy occurs, you know, how everyone wants to hear from you and wants to listen to you and things like that. So it was good. You know, we'll continue on the aftermath of that. But there was, you know, an outpouring of love and support. The wake was attended by, I don't know, 800, 1,000 people. They literally opened the doors and it was nonstop for like 5 or 6 hours.
Wow.
Like the mayor came, all these people came.
Wow.
So yeah, it was pretty amazing. My mom was an amazing woman.
No kidding. I'll be happy if one person comes to my wake.
I'm sure lots of people would come, Drea.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, that's crazy. And while you were talking too, Sam, I was sitting there thinking that I've even been in those situations where you're in those conflicting moments, right? Of you're not in control. So what are you supposed to do? I mean, thankfully, in my sense, that in those situations, nobody passed away on the other end. But
Sure.
I mean, it was the same concept. It's like I can remember being up hunting in the bighorns, and we went and found service just one day, and I had all these messages, voicemails, everything that my youngest niece, I think at the time, was being life flighted to Denver, you know, and she was in kidney failure. And it was just so like, you're just getting this news, and it's like, what do I do? Do I leave? Do you need me to come down the mountain? But it was also during COVID, so like nobody else could be in that room, you know. So it was like, what do I do? And I can I can appreciate that, and I think so many of us can. And you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
In those situations.
I'm generally very, very logical. Like that's my blessing and my curse. And so, you know, being in those weird, like emotional states that are really big, and you just, you know, it's kind of, it's amazing because, you know, for me, I never have that big of emotions. And, you know, even, you know, being in such a negative situation with my mom dying, like it you know, it's weird because it's like paralyzing, and you get these moments where you just, I don't know how to explain it. You know, it's just crazy. So,
and I'm sure just like numb. And
very much so. Yeah, I remember driving home and just screaming like top of my lungs.
Yeah, you know, that's very therapeutic sometimes. I've done that a time or two myself. But yeah, the paralyzation, and this is just my experience in that sense, too. And it's so minute that I can't imagine being in your shoes. Because Brady, we were working and putting in a floor one day for a client, and he ended up sawing a few of his fingers, not completely off, but you know, it was an emergency. And he hollered my name, and I'm like, what? You know, and I was like, wait a second, that wasn't a normal Drea holler. And so we both met at the door at the same time, and he had his hand in his shirt, and you could see blood everywhere. And I was just so like, in return was like, what do we do? Like, I feel like I'm with you on that like logical sense. It's like I stay really calm in these situations. It's almost eerie. And then I'm like, what do we do? I'm like, you need stitches. Like, let's go do that. Like, that's a good next step. But that is such a small instance. I can't even imagine. Like you said, there's probably no words for it.
Yeah, it was, you know, it's something that you remember forever. And but you know, we had more food than you could know what to do with. People just came out, and you know, you learn certain things from that perspective. Like, like how people immediately help. And
Mm-hmm.
then like same thing with when you have a baby, like really they don't need help the first couple weeks. They need help a month, 2 months later,
Right,
and trying
right.
to remember in times of need to say, I know you have an outpouring of support right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to hold back. In
Mm-hmm.
2 months, I'm going to call you and I'm going to see what I can do.
Yeah.
And actually like doing that, like that's, for anyone listening, like that's probably one of the most uh, beautiful things that you can do, because we were trying to freeze food so it didn't get spoiled and everything
Right.
else like that. So, but yeah, people don't need help immediately. Like there's so, come in and support people,
Mm-hmm.
ask how they're doing, like be there for them, but then like give them space and then come back a month or two later, and then
Mm-hmm.
you'll be much more able to support at that point in time.
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense. And I'm with you there. I'm like, well, I know you have a million people here, so when they're all gone, I'll be your next person.
But I think the one thing to say about that is like there's one thing about like saying like
Mhm,
I'll be there,
mhm.
and calling, but at that point you've kind of transitioned somewhat. So you just want to do it. Hey, when can I come and bring you a meal? And just
Right.
make it a lot more forceful than, because and your life goes on. I mean, even after that tragedy, within 2 weeks I was back to work, and and that type of thing occurs. I had my kids, and that I
Mhm,
had to continue to support.
mhm.
So you just have to be a little bit more forceful in it, and it's people will appreciate it even if they begrudgingly do it. So probably a month after, just in some sort of tragedy like that, just be there for them.
Well, and I mean, during this whole process too, like you said, you have a family in hand, your own wife and kids, and then you still have your brothers, your dad. Like, how did you guys all cope with that?
Each differently. um, we didn't really talk much about it as a family.
Mhm.
Each kind of processed it ourselves. My dad a few days later and my brother a few days later actually spoke at my mom's funeral.
Mm.
And it was amazing to me because they were able to do it and not even like have an emotional outburst like I'm even having right now.
Yeah.
And so, each their own. I think a lot of people process grief differently.
Mhm.
And some really compartmentalize and say, I have all these things that I need to accomplish. And doing those things is part of their grief journey. Um, Probably some of my brothers haven't even cried about my mom at all,
Mhm.
and it's not a reflection on them and them like not loving her as much or anything else. It's just how they process grief and how they get over grief. Some probably lean into service and supporting things as much as they can, because it takes your mind off of the things that you want to take your mind off of, right? So
Sure.
everyone
Yeah.
copes with things differently. I know that, um, I was numb for a while, but within a few weeks, life got back to normal. And that's one of the things that's really interesting too, is how you feel like the world is ending,
Mhm.
but for everyone else, it's just going on like normal. It's really baffling. It's like
Like
my
a
mom just
double
died.
life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like my mom just died. Why is the world still turning?
Mm.
And even that, there's beauty in that, and there's tragedy in that. Beauty because even like anything that happens tomorrow, the sun will come up,
Mm.
right? And the knowing that that's going to happen, there's comfort in it. It's going through the tragedy, but when you're in it, you're like, why is it still happening?
Yeah. Yeah. It's I've always like thought of that before, but sitting here and just talking about it's like seeing it for the first time, if that makes sense. Like, yes, the sun always does come up tomorrow, and and yes, I'm always trying to be so grateful for every day that I wake up, right? But it's interesting to me right this second. It's like, why does that have to be a constant reminder? Like why is it that I mean, for the most part, yes, I am always so grateful, but I'm sitting here, it's like, why does it hit so hard every time I hear that? It's just, it's a double life. And you do, like, whenever you're sitting there, living, through something like that, people don't even know what's happening behind your closed doors, or even on the people that were shoving the camera in your face. I find it very inspiring to me that you were like, people want to know, like, and be helpful, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, I feel like they just wanted to get a story, and it's like here I was having this negative mindset, and then here you are, Sam, being positive about it. Did it feel positive when that was all happening?
Well, again, for me, like, I get that people are trying to do their job, and we did communicate with, news outlets and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's something about that time, right? And I remember thinking, okay, well, here's my 15 minutes of fame. But I was just like, I'm not ready. I don't want to have this conversation. Like, this is the first time I'm openly talking about this
Mm.
tragedy. It's been almost 8 years. So, you know, a lot of the news, and and the story continues, obviously, because it was a hit and run car accident.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the news, it continued for a while, but nothing about it was like the story of it's almost belittling to my mom and her legacy, and what I wanted, that this woman that died tragically in a hit and run car accident, she's more than something like that,
Right.
and so, like, I wasn't gonna, so many people want their 15 minutes of fame. Like, that's never a situation which I wanted it. And so, and maybe you misheard what I said. I actually turned around. I didn't want to have them record me. And
Right.
it's kind of, you're not going to record a person with the back of their head, right? So
Right.
I did very thoughtfully that I wasn't going to allow it to be a news story,
Yeah.
because, that's like, I would have a conversation and they can do a bit, and they could, record the pictures of the police cars, but I wasn't going to really give them a story, to have at that point in time.
Mhm.
So
Well, that's true. I do notice that you said that. I just afterwards, you started in on that people were so helpful,
yeah,
and
so
so
I
I
mean,
think
my
it just
mom was a pillar of the community, and so we posted to some friends, and we basically said, please distribute,
yeah.
and everyone knew and came. Like, our house is, we've been in the same house for over 20 years. So when you see a picture of it on the news of the house, especially any local news is going to pick it up. Like,
Right.
people know who the family is. We've been a pillar of that community pretty much for 40 plus years.
Mhm.
And so, we have a recognition in the community as people that, serve the community.
Yeah, yeah. And what about, I mean, I know it was a hit and run, and I know that this is a big piece that goes into more of the conversation, but like, as I'm sitting here in the original conversation that we had, and I know so many other people are sitting here listening, it's like, what happened to the guy or
Yeah.
girl, whoever it was, the other driver?
So you know, they did a bunch of evidence to try to find out who it was, and there was enough to initially start a case against a person that they found, a delivery driver.
Mhm.
And we wanted, ultimately, for justice to be served. But a few things that was interesting was, we recognized, or I recognized, my brothers did as well, that the fact that a person takes another person's life and can't confess that to anyone, can't ask for forgiveness,
Mm.
is worse than getting it off their chest. Like, this person, one of his last, or one of my mom's last, well, in that experience, in the actual hitting, I've envisioned that he would have looked her in the eye.
Sure.
And, like, seeing that and knowing that she then died is terrifying for me.
Mm.
And so when you think about it from a perspective of justice, in a way, justice was served instantly, because of the fact that he had to live with that, um, on his conscience for the rest of his life.
Right.
The problem was, he never turned himself in. And the problem was, the evidence was not definitive, and they ultimately decided not to try the case. For us, my brothers and I, we never wanted the guy to, like, so many people have these sound bites of vengeance, and like, and having this person die, an eye for an eye, like, he doesn't deserve to live.
Right.
But a lot of how I envision it is, the guy made a mistake. Like, I don't tend to think that people purposefully swerve into and hit a person just standing there on the side of the road. I really think about it as, someone's on their phone texting, they look down, they look up, and their car veered away.
Mhm.
And, based on the Christian background we have, like, no sin is worse than another sin. He made a mistake, and he needs to suffer the consequences of that. But we really wanted him to just lose his license, because going to jail was not going to fix, or bring my mom back, and really
Right.
wasn't going to make him do something different the next time. Whereas, understanding that the license that he had was a privilege, and not a right, really we thought would be it. And when we spoke to the prosecutor, I was like, look, we don't even want to search for any court. We don't want that. We just want him to lose his license. And the crazy thing about that, Drea, they said was, they said you're the most amazing family we've ever met, because most people want like this person to die or
Right.
to have real vengeance on it. But basically they said we can't take away his license because he's a delivery driver and that's his vocation. So we can't do it. And it baffled me, because if our judicial system is really about rehabilitation,
Right.
and having a person lose their license for 6 months or a year so that they understand the value of the license that they have, that to me is the rehabilitation that we should be doing. But he ended up getting on his record obstruction of justice, because he was deleting pictures and lying to police officers about where he was and certain things like that. So that was the extent of what we got. So he still drives around the same area, and still, the last I heard, he's still delivering food from different local restaurants. Which is
Wow.
kind of a little frustrating to us, because
Sure.
he has shown that he's based on this experience, assuming it was him, because he obviously was never found guilty, is not really necessarily fit to drive behind a car.
Yeah. Well, and this actually just crossed my mind too. Like, was there even an apology to you guys, like from him?
Of course not. I mean, he never confessed to doing it. And his fiance wife then eventually said things like, justice was served, he's exonerated, all of this stuff. And the truth of the situation is, the person who was going to prosecute it then got a judgeship. And so she had to basically unload her casework to some other people. And the next guy decided he didn't want to actually prosecute.
Oh, wow.
And so we had two options. We basically could say, yes, we get him on obstruction of justice charges, and he confesses, or he acknowledges that, and it's time he already served. I think he spent one overnight in a prison. Or we leave the case open, which we knew that they weren't going to do anything because there's no new evidence, and then the statute of limitation would eventually be over, and then it would be done. So I decided that it's better for him to have something on his record than nothing. So his only thing, and that's the hardest part for me, is he doesn't confess. Whoever it is, he doesn't confess, and he gets away with a slap on the hand. Whereas if they confessed, they would have gotten even more jail time, right? Like I understand why it works like that, but that's always the frustrating part to me, because especially if he confess, like if confession and saying I'm sorry, there's the potential for forgiveness.
Right.
Whereas if you're not even willing to acknowledge that you did something wrong, there is no forgiveness. And we wanted to like there's some stories about the Amish, and some children that were mentally unstable ended up going and killing a bunch of Amish children. And the Amish came and took the mother, and we wept with her, right? Because she also lost her son. And there's something beautiful in that, to be able to ask for forgiveness and to forgive others. And I for him and his sake, I really I've struggled with that for a long time, because again, with never asking for forgiveness and having your last memory or that memory in your mind, it would haunt me.
Yeah, that would haunt me too. I commend you and your family for just understanding the small story behind how you guys reacted to the situation, especially with this other human, right? They are a human. You, of course, would have loved to get an apology. There would have been, the opportunity for forgiveness there, like you said. And also just even justice being served, and not to the extent of oh, well, he killed someone, so therefore he should die, right?
Sure.
And you guys are rare, like they were saying, because so many people believe that we are not responsible, but we have the option to bring justice to others, right? Whereas, being believers, it's well, I don't have the final say type of a situation. And so there really is a beauty in being able to go against what society says. Sure. And society says, oh, an eye for an eye, and here you guys were sitting there saying we don't want something to that extent harsh, but something would be nice, you know.
Sure.
And being able to not even have that closure, I guess, in a sense, and being able to keep moving forward so positively, it's incredible.
Yeah, so a few more things about it, which was really interesting, is my mom was like 60, maybe 60, not even 65, 63, 62. She
Mhm.
wasn't on any medicine. And it was not ironic, but we were still getting her mail after she died because you can't turn it off. And I remember we got a negative mammogram. So she didn't even have cancer, didn't have anything, healthiest person you would like pretty much meet. And
Yeah.
there and gone. You said something there, Drea, that I kind of want to touch on. It's like, how do we do that, right? And a lot of it comes to our faith system, right? So my mom was, most people would say my mom was a saint. Um, so like she was the one that would play every week. She'd go to a convalescent home
Mm.
and she'd play music. She was a beautiful musician. And she just, whatever her talent was, she wanted to use it to
Mm.
help others. And she knew with like these older people, they were all lonely.
Yeah.
And so she would play upbeat music and just bring life to them. And she would do the same thing with like church Christmas programs and things like that. And so like she was honored so much when she died. Like they actually put we had a garden center, and so she actually had this garden club that made like a monument for her at the
Yeah.
town. But like because she was such a wonderful woman and a wonderful mother and just a person that lived out her faith, like a lot of the solace that we get is that because we believe God is in control, God wouldn't take my mother or allow my mother to be taken unless my mom's work on earth was complete. And I take a lot of comfort in that, because if I were to take that moment that my mom was taken and I said, God is in control and he can take my mom at this moment any way he wants to, I personally prefer it to be healthy, happy, seeing her grandkids locally than like in a hospital with cancer, you know, just basically dying. So like I would talk to a lot of my friends who were losing their parents to cancer, and I'd be like, I feel bad for you.
Yeah.
And they never necessarily understood it, probably to the level, but God could have stopped that from happening. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know why he did it, but I don't need to know why. All I need to know is that my mom's work on earth was done, and he decided that. Otherwise, he would have stopped it. And I'm fine with that. And all my brothers are fine with that. So, it's another thing about even like people that claim to be Christian, they always question, why would a loving God allow that to occur?
Yeah.
Like, we're not God. And
Mhm.
there's always, out of loss and hardship, comes beauty and comes other great things that occurred. And my last 7, 8 years have been, and all my brothers and living out this life have been part of that journey. And
Yeah.
it's what we do with the adversity and what we do with the rest of our life that really matters. And so like any person that takes this loss and then just sits and does nothing and just feels sorry for themselves, that's not the intention, right? The
Mhm.
intention is for you to move on, and for me, it's to use that as a means to talk to people like this, and hopefully the community gets something out of it. And even if it's just to love the people that you have near you, and they could leave any moment,
Yeah.
that in itself is valuable and beautiful. So
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know too that the first time you and I were talking, you had mentioned about how your dad, gave you advice, and in the sense of, just being so appreciative for what you have and your wife,
yeah. And
um,
that, going back to the wake, that's why it took like 8 hours. Like we were fine, but my dad was trying to like tell every single person, every single couple, it's like, hold her tight tonight, love her, like, like cherish her, because it was pretty funny. And 8 years later, like I'm just in the same situation I was before my mom passing away, not really necessarily uh, cherishing my wife as much as I should and my children.
Yeah.
And so sometimes these are these wake up calls. But my dad in that moment was trying to give people a part of his truth, right?
Mhm.
That truth that life really is short and you can't control every aspect of it. But, and a lot of this has shaped some of my worldview with respect to, even trying to be today what I want to look back and be proud of in the future, right? And so it's like, how do you live your life today so that you don't have regrets for the future?
Mhm.
So, but yeah, he told every single person, and he'd spend 5 minutes with all of them, and this line was out the door, and we're like, Dad, you got to hurry up, but
He's like, no, this is our day.
it
I'm
was
gonna
it
take
was him, and like it was his way of trying to like we're talking about here, his way of trying to reach each of these individual people
Yeah.
and give them a little bit of like this wisdom that he had just accumulated, that he never took my mom um, or as much. He took her for granted more than he should have, right?
Yeah.
And all of us do that with other people, right? And
Mhm.
myself included. Like this is the issue about that life and it going on, is that we don't, for better or for worse, we don't dwell on the past forever. We do move forward and continue to fall into all the same old bad habits that we always have been
Mhm.
historically. So,
Yeah, and to think though too, like, spending that 5 minutes with every person that came through the door, that's his testimony. Like, and I think like, and there's nothing wrong with anyone that was in this situation by any means, but it's like it is funny to think of it in the sense of, because I could see myself doing that to my parents too. Like, come on, like let these people in. Like you're holding up the line. And too often we do that, and I think we should do that less. Like I think we should take those 5 minutes with everybody, no matter the situation.
yeah, even
And
if you've been on your feet for 4 or 5 hours, right? Just suck it up, Buttercup.
yeah, exactly. And I love that he did that. That's huge. And I'm sure that was a big portion of him to be able to just honor her too.
Sure.
And making it, being a good role model for you guys as well. And I know, in their conversation before, that he has definitely, laid some fatherly wisdom on you guys in that aspect. And I'm sure that has motivated you, this whole experience. I'm sure it motivated you to make those changes.
Yeah. Definitely, we've all done different things. Before that, my father and mother laid a foundation of entrepreneurship.
Mm.
Um, and it's interesting because as you reflect back on a person's life, you start to think about certain things that kind of shaped and defined them. So, like my mom and her love of music and playing at the convalescent homes, and my mom used to call it bringing the show on the road. So it was like we have a traveling the Broadway series. They have one in Hartford, and so they bring Broadway to you essentially. And so my mom used to bring like the Christmas show to these people, like I said. But when this happens, it's very interesting because you start to think about like the legacy that my mom left,
Mhm.
and some of it was pretty interesting, and like the fact that people honored my mother with a plaque, and this garden that they groom, and it's by a school. um we were thinking about like words and sentences that kind of uniquely defined my mom's life, and so one of them was a saying that we really love, which is, because let me give you a little more backstory.
Yeah.
I have a brother who had a brain tumor, and he almost died, and so he had brain damage because he had a tumor, and the way they did it was they would open up your brain and then they would go in and take out the tumor. And so he had learning disability, he had brain damage, still does, he's still alive, the joke is that he's gonna outlive all of us. And but my mom used to say things like, fair's not giving everyone the same, fair's giving everyone what they need when they need it. And we really like that because my brother frequently needed more,
Yeah.
and sometimes we needed more. But the world today kind of really just talks about, well, give everyone the same because that's fair.
Yeah.
The world would be a better place if we could just find what people truly needed and give it to them. And if they don't need it, don't give it to them. And if everyone lived that motto and that mantra, like, the world would be a better place. I know it's hard, it's pretty much impossible,
Mm-hmm.
but knowing what people need and knowing people that well that you could support them in that way is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom did that. She used to just, we used to kind of call her the enabler. She would enable us to, like, see our dreams, realize our dreams. And she would be like, what do you need from me?
Mm-hmm.
Even to her own detriment. She would just do it. And so that's what, I don't know if it actually went on the monument, but that's what we wanted to put on it, was fair is not giving everyone the same. Fair is giving everyone what they need when they need it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It's kind of a running joke for me, Sam, is like, every time I hear something that's just so powerful that everyone should hear it, I want to make t-shirts. And it could be funny too. But I'm sitting here, it's like, what if we had t-shirts made that said, what do you need from me? Like, how many people would be able to take you up on that? And then also, just like, it's a reminder for us every day, because man, it takes a lot for people to make a change. Like, for instance, just even sitting here, um, you going through, the big traumatic experience that you guys had to go through, and, being able to change those habits, just merely even appreciating your wife as much as you should or want to. And here we are still, 8 years down the road, and it's like, this is something that you have to practice every day.
Sure.
And us too. I mean, like, none of us don't. Like, there's always something that we are having to practice. But it's like, I always make the joke with my family that I always had to learn everything the hard way. And it didn't matter if any of my siblings went through something, I had to go through it too and do
Sure.
it better, and better, not meaning it was less traumatic, but in these situations, it's like, here's somebody, you, Sam, in this sense, that is willing to share your story and just explain to people what happened and how this has affected you and your family. The fact that they don't have to go through what you went through in order to make a change. They can make that change take a day.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about everything being fair, I think that is a change that people can really put into perspective today.
Sure.
Asking, what do you need from me, from, whoever, using your gifts when it comes to, blessing other people. I don't have a whole lot to give, but I love to bless people through food. I love to bake, and I love making super yummy treats. And Brady's, is like, I don't need that in my life, but if you need an excuse, I'll eat it. But just being able to find unorthodox ways, and I use quotes because I don't want to just go out and buy them something. I want to make them something. I want it to be personal, and I want it to be lasting. I think that's something also that your mom leaves, in that sense of being able to leave her music, the smiles, the laughter. I'm sure there's people who are dancing too. I have a very soft spot in my heart for the older generation because they are lonely.
Sure.
But yeah, being able to use your gifts for the better in that sense too.
Yeah. So I agree wholeheartedly. When you started that conversation, it made me think about another thing, which is that, one of the things that I think, at least recently, I've transitioned from my mom, is the concept of putting yourself in that moment, right? So like we just talked about, like, you could lose a person in a moment,
Good.
right? And so, like, I've actually thought about sometimes and said, I'm going to put myself into a mentality of, my wife just gave me divorce papers, right? Or my wife just died. Like, how am I feeling in that moment?
Yeah.
Like, how am I? Because, like, these moments, especially in life, can allow you to visualize and imagine that moment. And based on how you're feeling, it can allow you to make the change today to potentially not have that moment occur. If it's a divorce, if it's a death, obviously you really can't do much about that. And that you can make that change for today to make your tomorrow better, right? And so that's kind of what my dad was trying to say when he was talking to those people, is like, understand my moment, understand where I am, like, understand that your lovely wife could be gone tomorrow. How does that make you feel? He didn't say it that way, but he wanted them to internalize that in a beautiful way. And that's why, like, I've, at least in the last 7 or 8 years, I've really been transitioning a lot. I've been doing a lot of soul searching, trying to improve myself, especially lately as a business owner and entrepreneur. And one of the things I'd like to do a lot is I like to talk to older people because there's something about the wisdom that they've accumulated over their entire lifetime, and understanding the regrets that they have, and being able to make a conscious choice today that I'm not going to let that be my regret. I'm not going to let that be my regret, right? So many of them talk about things like working too much, right? Not spending time with their kids, that divorce of their spouse or whatever. And so the wisdom of speaking to those people is that then you can make the choice today, because you have that additional years left, to not have that be your regret as well. So I've definitely transitioned from like intelligence and trying to be as smart as possible to now I'm really trying to be more a person of wisdom and allowing people to learn and learning from others, so that I can basically craft the next portion of my life so that I don't live with regrets.
Yeah, I don't want to live with regrets either. And I sit here and I have conversations with people all the time, and people entrust me with a lot. There's a lot of things I don't say, like, especially like if it's not my business, you can tell me, we can talk about it, but I'm not going out, and telling the next person. With that said, like there is so much life I live with people that I get to use those stories to help the next person, right? And so there's often times where people are like, Dre, don't tell anyone about this. And it's like, okay, I won't. That doesn't bother me. But at the same time, they say that because if I live through something, an experience, to where the next person I talk to can benefit from the experience I just went through, no matter who it involves, it's worth it to me to be humble and to be vulnerable and to just like sit there and just be completely transparent of like, yeah, I was stupid. I made this mistake, right? But here's the beauty that happened from it. And I don't know, like you were talking about earlier, like it's a matter of like, we don't know when God's going to call us home. And I often question many a time growing up of like, why did I have to go through that? Why was that something that I needed to do? Like, why did God let that happen? I mean, full-blown Christian since I was 14, did the whole acceptance and baptism and everything. And I mean, there's often times where I sit there and wonder, but then here I am today, being able to have these kind of conversations, being able to share stories from people like you that have had things impact just like I have, that we can share with others to help them through the bad times. Because unfortunately, you're not the only one who's been through this. And unfortunately, you won't be the last. But fortunately, people have you to look up to sit there and say, well, Sam did it, so can I, and just being able to keep that positive perception and heed the advice and take in that wisdom. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, I definitely think, I think a lot about, faith in God. And you recognize that if I've never experienced something that you've experienced, how can I reach you? How can I build that relationship and explain in a meaningful way how what I'm saying is worth listening to? Right. And so, we had a lot of talks. I had a lot of talks immediately after my mom's death about how God has allowed us to go through it. And now it can allow us to talk to others that have had a similar experience occur, and to minister to them in that way. And I believe that is literally the reason why God allows bad things to happen to good people, is because that allows you to be able to minister to the people hurting in this world. Amen. Without that ability, how can I speak to, or without this experience occurring, how can I speak to people that had loss like that?
Absolutely.
I can't. And so that's where I believe. And like, so it's, people always question, well, why would a loving God do that? Why would a loving God not do that? Because a loving God would help you help others.
Yeah.
Right. And to be able to minister to people in their time of need.
So,
it's a different framework. It's very, very different. And I think that, a lot of people, a lot of ex-Christians, a lot of atheists, a lot of others just don't really understand how you can have the duality of a loving God that also allows bad things to happen. And
Sure.
I think for me, it's very, very easy and clear to understand why a loving God would do that.
Well, I mean, and we can put it into simple stances, right? At least for me, anyway. I can sit there and be like, I did something bad as a kid. My parents spanked my butt. Guess what? That was a bad thing to happen, but I learned from it.
Sure.
And I was able then to tell my little brother, hey, don't go do that. Like it's a bad idea. But just in the most simple analogy of sitting there saying, like, you know what, not every time that we go through this life, and in not every time that something bad happens is really what God wanted to have happen to you. We live in a sinful and fallen world. Sometimes we don't go on the path that God wants us to go on, and we take our own path, and because of our choices some bad things are going to happen, and so we're not perfect. It's not going to be a perfect life. And but at that same token, there's stories that our stories is the opportunity to minister to other people, exactly like you were saying, because at the end of the day, you could never have talked about this.
Sure.
You don't have to. And then here you are. And it's my goal and my prayer that this story helps and touches at least one person. That's all that matters.
That's all
To
that matters.
me.
No, I agree with it wholeheartedly. And the hard part though is, we like to, again, the same concept of a fair God. Well, my mom died because she was a bad person. It's a fair God, right? My mom did nothing to deserve that. Like I can tell you stories about more of my mom being a saint, but it doesn't matter. It's not about causality. God doesn't do cause and effect. He doesn't just say, because you do this, you do that. The world does do that, right? Like, your parents tell you not to touch the stove and you want to check it out and you burn yourself, and you're going to learn from your mistakes really, really quickly. So there is some of that in nature.
Yeah.
I tend to take that as somewhat like karma. Like if you do bad things long enough, eventually it's going to come back because there's natural, immediate consequences that happens to behaviors. But like, that's not necessarily a God thing either. That's just a world thing. So
Yeah. And what I mean, for somebody who, because I can say this, I have grown up in the church. I have been, knowing who God was from the moment I could even think, right? But at the same token, like I've also fallen away from God,
sure.
and to the point of being extremely angry and like not a happy person. And I wasn't doing good to anybody around me being in that spirit. Like when I sit there and think about people who don't necessarily have that faith system, and I look at you, and I can only imagine how in those situations well, I can't imagine that without that faith, how scary and how fearful and how isolated that can make you feel. And my parents, some people think it's kind of vulgar, but they always talk about their death, when they're going to die, whenever God calls them home. And Dad's always saying, to live is Christ, to die is gain. Dre, if I'm going tomorrow, it's for a reason. I'm just like, I'm still gonna miss you. I was like, this is not okay. It doesn't mean that, just because you have faith in God, that it makes it any easier.
Sure.
You have definitely gone through the turmoil for it and everything. But the most important thing I see of that is that you do have this faith system to fall back on. You do have this faith system to be positive about it, and look to make it good and not look for the bad in that sense.
Yeah. And going back to what we talked about before, like without that faith system, my mentality could not have been so positive, right? Like someone randomly was taken from you immediately that was completely healthy, no medication, nothing to say that anything was going to change. She's here today, gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
Without God, how do you take that positively? Like I would ask that to atheists. How would you take random chance? Okay, well, how do you have an upbeat persona when something like tragic like that happens, right? So it's definitely interesting. And you spoke about your walk. Like I still struggle with my walk with God. Like that's the journey that we are on, we have a destination, right? That hopefully as Christians is to heaven, but the journey is why we're here on earth, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think a lot about it, God, and, how do you reconcile things like fate and free will? Was my mom fated to die? Was it free will that she died? How do you reconcile all of that? Like, why would God, a loving God, allow sin to come into this world and not just start over or do something else?
Yeah.
And where I am more recently on it is that as a business owner, I hate micromanaging. I think it's the worst thing in the world. And so a micromanager is like, I'm going to, as the best person, make sure that everything is done perfectly, right? So I'm going to get involved in every little thing so that everything is done perfectly. There's nothing fun about that. To me, that is the definition of hell, pretty much. And so but there's something beautiful about building a company where your whole mission is to serve them and to help them become the best they can be.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. And they're going to make mistakes. That's sin. But that's what I would say as a loving God would do, would be to say, you're able to do what you want. What can you do?
Right.
Instead of, I'm going to micromanage every little thing. And so I look at it and people say, well, why would God allow sin to happen? And without the ability to do wrong, there's nothing beautiful in the fact that you're doing right.
Love that.
So, and that's like where I am too, is like, why would a loving, like, it's all the same thing. It's pretty deep. It's something that I kind of realized recently. And so there is free will and there is fate, right? Because God can control and he knows what's going to happen. But really, that's why we have our purpose here on earth, is to, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing people in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right? And so that's how God knows that we're loving him and doing his work, is following that commission that he gave us, and to become the best that we can be. The story of the talents, to what much is given, much is expected, right? And so that's a lot of it. My journey is, a lot of it's about trying to, follow God's calling, have a platform like this to speak about my faith, right? And to, and hopefully to help people to realize maybe a slightly different worldview and mental frame that can help them with it when adversity occurs. I continue to be a very optimistic, happy person, even though I've suffered adversity in my life, right? So.
And you're always working on yourself to be better. It's not like you think you're perfect, and it's not like, just because you went through something terrible, you're entitled to just an easy, fair life. And it's also refreshing. I mean, even just for me, that, as we do sit there and we listen to the news outlets and just life in general, and how we are being told other people react, right? That we do have free will and we do have a choice that we can make. We have the choice to sit there and say, well, it doesn't have to be an eye for an eye. Like, let's make this, something more humane, right? And then it's also the opportunity to sit there and be able to put a small little glimpse of perspective in the fact that the minority is loud and the majority is not as loud, but it sure is beautiful. We're all hanging out, loving life. And I think that is something that is to be said, even though we do live in a sinful world and we're not all perfect and we all make mistakes and we have to come back from those mistakes, we still love life. And I can tell you, I'm not a positive person when I am not on the right walk with God. It was not pretty. And I feel for everyone that I feel, because it is important to me that everyone that I touch in this world, whether it's a conversation, whether it's I made them a baked treat and they don't even know me, right? Like, it's important to me that I bless them in one way, shape, or form. But when, again, you sit there and wonder, like, why did this happen to me? I couldn't sit there and say that if I never did walk away from God and be able to come back. And so God's grace is nothing short of like incredible. Like,
Mhm. Absolutely.
I can tell you that I can remember the day that that grace just came upon me. And again, right? Like, not just as a little child, like I'm here sitting here as an adult, and that grace just coming over me and just putting that wave. I mean, it's unexplainable. Kind of like how you were
Sure.
talking with your mom. It's just like you cannot put into words how it makes you feel.
Yep, I definitely like, yeah, I remember a similar situation, and I think it can happen multiple times, right? I think that God can really just, you can feel God's power on your life. And even in that one, tell you another quick story about the days after my mom died. A few weird things happened, and they were not really easily explainable. I mean, you can always explain them with circumstances, but with them together, I took a lot of solace with them.
Mhm.
So the first was when I was driving home that day, I saw some deer across the road. And like, deer cross the road, but how often do deer cross the road? It was on the day that my mom died.
Mm.
And then the next thing, I think it was either that night or the night before, I have hardwired smoke detectors. In the middle of the night, they just went off. Like, how often do smoke detectors go off randomly for no reason in the middle of the night? And I really felt like it was my mom's presence just speaking that I'm okay.
Yeah.
So
I am just so appreciative of you, Sam, coming on here and being willing to share that story. Because, like I do not take it for granted that this is not something that you've opened up about, since it did happen. And I just think that it's a before you knew me. I've known Sam for quite some time, and I have never known this about you. And it just, I feel like beautiful is overused at this point, but it's like, that's all I can think about is this, like, there's just such a beauty to your story, and it's a beauty to your human and your spirit and your family. And it's, not many people are willing to share.
sure.
And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, this last stage of my life, I've really been trying to be more about having people recognize that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
There's so many things going on, polarized world, a lot of addiction to devices with our children and ourselves.
Mhm.
So much going on, everyone feeling like they don't have all the answers. And I think the world's a much better place when we all recognize that we're all going through the same things, and we
Mhm.
can all share and provide value that we've received, experiences or whatever that have shaped us in meaningful ways. Because it's not, doesn't cost anything, but the wisdom that we've experienced to get to where we are can help so many people. And so that's one of the things I definitely want to do more in my future, is a lot of mentoring and helping others reach their full potential, and to just realize that all the things that we're all going through together. No one's alone.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if we all are willing to serve and support each other, again, the world will be a better place.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I love it too, because we're not alone. And that is a big, part of why I even wanted to create this podcast. But we're not alone, but it's okay to talk about it. It's not a matter of like, well, yeah, well, somebody else had a harder life than you did. Well, your story doesn't matter, right? Like, that's not the case. It's the case of somebody else is going through something that you've already been through, and you have the opportunity to help them through that.
Mhm.
And not only that, but then share the wisdom as you have developed in that time to be able to explain to others that, guess what, like, you can take this route or you can take this route. Which one are you going
Sure.
to go?
Yeah.
So are there, I feel like you kind of already beat me to the punch, but is there any other, like, just final thoughts and on the power of your personal transformation, Sam, that you want to leave the listeners with at this point?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I want to just rehash, because I think for me it's very powerful, is the whole concept of like, put yourself into a moment and think about how you'd feel in that moment, whatever it is. Like one of the ones that I have right now is that my daughter's gonna be going off to college in a year. And if I put myself in that moment and how I'm feeling, sad, what can I do to help facilitate that relationship in the time that I do have?
Yeah.
If you do that repeatedly in life, I think you'll probably live with no regrets.
No regrets. Don't get tattooed. Don't do that. I had to leave it on a lighter note, Sam. No, I am so appreciative. And you all, Sam says he wants to get in mentoring. So, mentor people in life. So I'm sure we will have his contact information below this video. So that way you can reach out and just let him know how he has blessed you today. Like sharing these stories is not easy. But feel free to reach out to him and just let him know what he's done for you today. That's the whole purpose of Before You Knew Me. So thank you, Sam,
Thank you.
for joining us.
Thank you, Drea. It was fun.